The sky was strangely clear that morning, too quiet for a city that once buzzed with honking cars, hurried footsteps, and the distant chatter of people glued to their phones. Now, silence ruled. The streets of Havenport, once the beating heart of urban life, were a graveyard of abandoned vehicles, shattered glass, and eerily flapping street banners. In the middle of it all stood Eli Mercer, 32, once an office worker with a predictable routine and no desire for chaos. Now, armed with a rusted fire axe and a backpack filled with essentials, Eli navigated the ghost town, listening for the telltale groan that meant death was near. It had all started just 2 weeks ago. The news had called it a highly contagious neurological virus, spreading through major cities at an alarming rate. At first, people stayed indoors, thinking it would pass like any flu. But it didn't. What began as flu-like symptoms ended in madness, then death, and then something worse. The infected didn't die in the normal sense. Their minds vanished, replaced with something primal, violent, and relentless. They weren't just sick, they were changed. And they were hungry. Eli had lost contact with his family on day 4. One moment, he was talking to his younger sister, Jamie, over a static-filled call, and then the line went dead. He hadn't heard from her since. That moment haunted him like a shadow. But he didn't have time for grief. Not yet. Every moment now was about survival. Moving silently past an overturned police cruiser, Eli stopped beside a convenience store with smashed windows. He peered inside. Empty shelves, smeared footprints, a forgotten stuffed toy lying near the doorway. He took a breath, tightened his grip on the axe, and stepped inside. The smell hit him first, stale air mixed with rot. He moved quickly, grabbing cans of food and bottled water where he could. Every crunch of glass beneath his boots felt like an alarm bell. He paused near the refrigerated section, eyeing the reflection in the glass. That's when he saw it, movement behind the aisle. He didn't breathe. A shadow moved. Slow. Jerky. Then a low, gurgling moan. Eli backed up, silent and smooth, toward the door. But the thing had already locked onto him. It staggered into view, skin pale, eyes clouded with gray, jaw slack and bloody. A former human. Now one of them. The creature let out a howl, alerting others. From deeper within the store, more figures emerged. Eli bolted. Outside, the sun blazed down as he sprinted across the street, ducking into a narrow alley behind an apartment block. His lungs burned, but he didn't stop until he reached a chain-link fence. He scaled it, ripped his sleeve on the wire, and landed hard on the other side. The moans grew fainter behind him, but he didn't relax. This wasn't the first time he'd nearly been caught, and it wouldn't be the last. The infected were faster now than they'd been a week ago. Stronger too. Whatever the virus was doing, it was evolving. Eli found a moment of safety inside an old warehouse. He blocked the doors with crates and rested against the wall, listening. No moans. Just silence. From his pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper, a hand-drawn map. Several spots were circled in red, including one labeled Safe Zone. Radio tower last broadcast. That was where he was headed. The radio signal had stopped 2 days ago, but Eli needed to believe someone else was out there. He needed to believe this wasn't the end. He took a sip of water and opened his notebook. Every day, he wrote down what he saw. It helped him stay sane. His latest entry read: Day 14, Havenport is lost. More infected today. They seem to move with more awareness, not just instinct. Heard one mimic a sound I made. They're learning. That's new. Heading to the tower tomorrow. I have to know if anyone's left. He closed the notebook and stared at the door. He knew he couldn't stay in one place too long. They always came. But for now, he had a few hours. Just a few. As night fell, a low sound echoed in the distance. Not the usual groan, something more deliberate. A pattern. A signal. Eli stood, eyes narrowing. He wasn't alone after all. But whether it was another survivor or something worse, that was the real question. Tomorrow, he would move. Tomorrow, he would begin his journey to the radio tower. Whatever waited for him there, hope, death, or something in between, he had no choice but to face it. This was no longer just survival. This was the beginning of his last stand. The morning air was thick with fog and the smell of ash. Somewhere in the distance, a fire still burned, probably a house left unattended, or worse, a trap set off by survivors trying to distract the infected. Eli didn't stop to find out. He had one goal now: reach the radio tower on Ridge Hill, just outside the city limits. The streets were growing more dangerous by the day. The infected weren't wandering aimlessly anymore, they were grouping, moving with something disturbingly close to purpose. Eli had seen it just the day before, a group of 6 turning in unison toward a noise, communicating through shrill screeches and guttural moans. It was as if they were hunting together. He moved carefully along the edge of an old freeway, ducking under collapsed signs and weaving between stalled vehicles. His backpack was heavier than usual, weighed down by the supplies he scavenged the night before, but he couldn't afford to drop anything. There might not be another chance to stock up. Passing a flipped delivery truck, he noticed a trail of smeared handprints leading from the driver's door. Some were human-sized. Others, larger. A cold knot twisted in his gut. He pressed on. By midday, he reached the outer neighborhoods, quiet suburbs that once held children's laughter and backyard barbecues. Now they were skeletal rows of homes, windows broken, doors ajar, every wall scarred with signs of panic and escape. He passed a basketball lying in a driveway, a bicycle tipped over in the grass, its tires flat and rusted. The kind of things that made the silence even more deafening. Near a broken fence, Eli spotted movement. He dropped to one knee, axe ready. But it wasn't a zombie. It was a girl, maybe 16, watching him from behind a trash bin. She had a backpack, a crowbar, and eyes that didn't blink. She looked like someone who had already seen too much. Eli raised his hands slowly. "I'm not infected." The girl didn't respond. Just stared. "I'm heading to the radio tower," he said, voice calm. "Looking for survivors." Still, silence. He sighed. "Suit yourself." He turned to leave, but the girl's voice finally came, quiet and hoarse. "They're watching." Eli paused. "Who?" "Them. The smart ones." A chill ran down his spine. He faced her again. "You've seen it too?" She nodded. "One of them followed me for 3 hours. Didn't make a sound. Just watched. Like it was waiting for something." Eli stepped closer. "I've seen it too. They're not like they used to be." "Some still aren't," she muttered. "But the ones who are, they don't moan. They listen." "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Callie." "I'm Eli." He glanced at the houses nearby. "You hiding out here?" She shook her head. "Was heading to the tower too. Until I realized it might be a trap." Eli frowned. "You think someone's luring survivors? Or, it's not survivors at all anymore?" The possibility hadn't crossed his mind, not fully. But the way the signal had gone silent so suddenly, it did seem strange. Still, it was the only lead he had. He couldn't afford to turn back. "I'm going anyway," he said. "You're welcome to come. Safety in numbers." Callie eyed him for a moment, then nodded. "One condition. We don't travel at night. Ever." Eli agreed. After what he'd heard last night, those rhythmic sounds echoing through the fog, he wasn't eager to see what the infected did after dark. They moved through the neighborhood cautiously, using the houses for cover. As they passed an old elementary school, Eli noticed a message scrawled across the brick wall in red spray paint. "They evolve. They remember. They hunt." Callie stared at it. That wasn't there yesterday. Eli's pulse quickened. That meant someone, or something, was here. Recently. Suddenly, from the gymnasium doors, came a low creak. They both froze. A figure emerged, lurching, twitching. Its eyes locked on them immediately. Then came the sound they both feared, a bone-chilling shriek, high-pitched and urgent. More groans answered from nearby houses. "They're calling others," Eli muttered. "Run," Callie whispered. They sprinted down the street as the infected began pouring out from alleys and doorways, drawn by the call. Eli turned and saw one of them, a tall, wiry figure, not chasing, but watching. Head tilted. Studying. That wasn't instinct. That was intent. He and Callie jumped over a hedge, ducked into a backyard, and slipped through a broken garage. They didn't stop until they'd crossed several blocks and could no longer hear the pursuit. Panting, Eli dropped to his knees behind a fence. Callie looked at him, terrified. "They're not just hunting. They're planning." Eli wiped sweat from his brow. "Then we'd better plan better." As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, they found shelter inside an abandoned storm drain. Safe, for now. But both knew that safety was running out. Tomorrow, the tower. Or whatever remained of it. Morning came as a pale gray light filtering through the slats above the storm drain. Eli stirred first, sitting up slowly, every joint aching from the cold concrete beneath him. Beside him, Callie was already awake, staring at the narrow exit with her crowbar gripped tightly in both hands. "You hear anything?" Eli asked quietly. She shook her head. "Too quiet." They climbed out carefully, emerging into a world painted in fog once again. The neighborhood around them looked deceptively calm. Cars sat rusting on cracked pavement. Curtains fluttered in broken windows. No birds. No wind. Just silence. Ridge Hill and the radio tower loomed in the distance, less than a mile now. The metal skeleton of the structure stood tall against the morning haze. For Eli, it symbolized hope. But Callie looked at it like a warning. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Eli nodded. "We need to know who's sending the signal. Or if they're still alive." They moved quickly, ducking through alleys and hopping backyard fences. With every step, Eli felt more exposed. Every shadow behind a curtain could hide an infected. Every alley could spring a trap. As they neared the base of the hill, they saw the first sign of something off, a barricade made of cars, appliances, and furniture arranged in a circle. Crude symbols were painted on the sides in charcoal, strange spiral shapes, paired with handprints. A warning? Or a message? They climbed over cautiously. "What kind of survivor builds something like this?" Callie whispered. "Someone who doesn't want visitors," Eli muttered. They moved through the perimeter and up the path, toward the tower's concrete base. The air smelled like smoke and something else, metallic, like rust and rot. The closer they got, the more unease set in. Then they saw it. A body hung from a lamppost near the tower's fence. It wasn't a fresh kill. The corpse had been strung up for days, maybe weeks, and yet it hadn't been eaten, not by the infected. That meant one thing. "Someone put this here," Eli said grimly. "As a message." The tower compound looked fortified. The gate was chained shut, and sheets of corrugated metal lined the fences. Empty cans hung from wires overhead, a crude alarm system. But there were no guards. No movement. "Hello?" Eli called out. Silence. Callie picked up a rock and tossed it against the fence. The clatter rang out across the lot, bouncing off metal and concrete. Then, a rustle. They both ducked, weapons ready. A voice called from inside. "Weak. Stay back." Eli squinted toward the source. A face appeared through a slit in the fence, a man, pale and bruised, with one arm bandaged tightly in blood-soaked cloth. "We're not infected," Eli said. "Just trying to survive. We followed your broadcast." The man's eyes darted around nervously. "You shouldn't have." Callie stepped forward. "What happened here?" The man swallowed hard. "They came. Not the ones who groan and stumble. The others. Quiet ones. They tore through us at night. Took people. We tried to fight, but we were outmatched. Eli gritted his teeth. How many of you are left? Just me. And I'm not making it through another night. He fumbled with something and slipped a battered walkie-talkie through the fence. This connects to the emergency channel. You'll hear more from that than you will from me now. Callie took it. I've seen things, the man whispered. They're learning. They mimic. One of them spoke. Eli blinked. What do you mean, spoke? I mean it used words. Not perfectly, but enough. They're evolving. We're not facing a virus anymore. We're facing something, changing. Before they could respond, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the compound. The man flinched. They're back, he gasped. Get out while you can. A shadow shifted along the fence, tall, fast, crawling along the wall with unnatural ease. Callie grabbed Eli's sleeve. We need to go. Now. No, Eli said. We can't leave him. But it was too late. The fence burst open, and something came through, a blur of movement, pale and lean, eyes glowing faintly like coals. It didn't scream or moan. It smiled. Eli raised his axe, but the creature ignored him. It went straight for the man, leaping through the air with inhuman precision. The scream that followed was short. Eli and Callie ran. Down the hill, past the barricade, through the fog again. Behind them, the tower was silent once more. They didn't stop until they reached the same storm drain they'd left that morning. Once inside, Callie clutched the walkie-talkie tightly. Eli sat against the wall, breathing heavily. He said it spoke, Callie whispered. If that's true, we're not in a zombie apocalypse anymore. No, Eli muttered. This is a war. They sat in silence as night fell again, the walkie-talkie resting between them. Tomorrow, they'd listen. But what they would hear. That was the true beginning of the nightmare. The storm drain echoed with every drop of water, but Eli wasn't hearing that. He was listening to static. The walkie-talkie, battered and smeared with dried blood, crackled beside him. Callie sat across the tunnel, staring into the dark with a faraway look. Her crowbar lay across her knees, but her grip was tighter than before. Whatever they saw at the tower had shaken her. Then, a blip. The radio came alive. To any remaining survivors, repeat, do not respond unless verified clean. Fort Mason still stands. Eli jumped forward and grabbed the walkie. Hello? This is Eli James and Callie Torres. We're alive. We're clean. There was a pause, a long one. Then a new voice answered. How do we know you're not compromised? We've been on the move. Haven't been bitten, scratched, or exposed to any infected in days. We just came from the Ridge Hill Tower. That got their attention. You survived Ridge Hill? The voice asked, now urgent. Barely, Eli said. The man broadcasting from there, he's gone. Something killed him. Not one of the usual infected. A longer pause this time. Meet us at Grid Point Charlie. 12 hours from now. You'll find a flare in the intersection of 5th and Oaks. If you're clean and honest, we'll take you in. The signal cut out. Eli lowered the radio slowly. They're real. A group. Organized. Maybe even protected. Callie didn't look relieved. She stared at him with furrowed brows. And what if they're not what they claim? We've seen what happens to groups when things go wrong. Remember the barricade at the tower? That wasn't done by infected. That was human panic. Eli nodded. You're right. But we need people. A network. Shelter. Callie stood and shouldered her pack. Then let's move. But if something feels off, we walk. Getting to 5th and Oaks meant crossing through Old Town, one of the densest zones hit during the initial outbreak. The buildings loomed like broken teeth, windows shattered, alleys filled with rusted debris. Every step echoed, and the fog hadn't lifted in 2 days. As they entered an old streetcar tunnel, they spotted something strange. A child's voice. Faint. Singing. Callie's hand froze mid-step. "Did you hear that?" Eli nodded, tightening his grip on the axe. The voice was coming from behind a rusted vending machine, wedged against the tunnel wall. "Ring around the rosy." Callie's eyes widened. That rhyme again. The last time they'd heard it was at a collapsed schoolyard, where infected children had been seen mimicking the song. Eli crept forward slowly and peeked behind the machine. There was no child. Just an old radio, half buried in mud, repeating the song on loop. But the moment he turned it off, a snarl echoed down the tunnel. Then 2 more. Shadows moved. "Infected!" Callie shouted. 3 of them emerged from the dark, fast, lean, their eyes glowing faintly. Not groaning. Not limping. Hunting. Eli and Callie turned and ran, ducking over broken benches and rubble. The tunnel opened into an old plaza, and as they reached it, Eli fired his flare gun straight into the sky. The flare hissed and painted the fog in red. The infected didn't care. They kept coming. Callie spun and swung hard, smashing one straight in the jaw. Its head cracked against a concrete pillar, but it didn't fall. It scrambled back up, like it knew how to adapt. Eli took the second one down with the axe, burying it deep into its spine. The third pounced on him, claws raking across his jacket. Callie drove her crowbar into its ribs, dragging it off. They gasped for breath as the plaza went quiet again. The flare sizzled in the sky, and then they saw it. A flashlight. Then 3 more. Armed figures emerged from a rooftop, in tactical gear, helmets, and face shields. One pointed a rifle and shouted, "Don't move." Callie raised her hands, breathing heavily. "We called the flare. We're not infected." One of the masked figures scanned them with a handheld device. It beeped green. "Clean," he said. "Let's move." They were escorted through a hidden side door and into an old underground garage converted into a checkpoint. Inside were supply crates, a makeshift medical station, and steel doors leading deeper underground. The man who scanned them removed his helmet. He was older than expected, mid-40s, weathered, but alert. "Colonel Hart. Welcome to the edge of civilization." Eli gave a tired nod. "You're Fort Mason?" Hart smiled grimly. "You're not there yet. This is one of many checkpoints. The real facility's buried deep in the mountains. We don't take chances anymore." Callie looked around. "You've been listening to survivors?" "Not many left," Hart replied. "But you're lucky. Most we find are either bitten, or not themselves anymore." "What do you mean?" Eli asked. Hart handed him a folder. Inside were sketches. Anatomical drawings of something almost human, but wrong. "Some of the infected aren't just shambling anymore," he said. "They're watching. Copying. Communicating." Callie looked up. "You mean they're learning?" Hart nodded. "And if they are, humanity doesn't have much time left." The corridor smelled like damp metal and old oil, dimly lit by overhead lights that buzzed and flickered. Eli and Callie followed Colonel Hart deeper into the checkpoint facility. The further they walked, the more it felt like entering the skeleton of something ancient, abandoned long ago but kept alive by sheer desperation. This was a Cold War bunker, Hart explained as he passed another checkpoint. Built for a different kind of apocalypse. Guess it finally found its purpose. Eli looked around at the men and women stationed at makeshift command posts. Most of them looked tired, but not broken. Hope flickered in their eyes, just barely. Hart led them into a secured room with steel walls and maps pinned all over. Red pins marked infected zones. Green ones were few, and surrounded. "We thought the worst was behind us after the initial outbreak," Hart said. But then the behavior of the infected started to change. Callie leaned against the wall. "We saw one at Ridge Hill. It was faster. Smarter. It didn't act like the others. Hart tapped a folder on the table. We call those variants. They're the reason Fort Mason's gone dark. That made Eli's chest tighten. You lost contact? 3 days ago, Hart said. No transmissions. No scout signals. We had a full civilian safe zone and elite personnel stationed there. They had walls, weapons, systems. Everything. Callie frowned. And not even a distress signal? Not a peep, Hart said grimly. We sent one recon team yesterday. They haven't returned. Eli's jaw clenched. You think the variants got them? Hart nodded. Or worse, they became variants. A heavy silence settled over the room. Callie stepped forward. Why tell us all this? Why trust us? Hart studied them both. Because you made it this far. You weren't just running, you were surviving. Thinking. Fighting back. People like you, we need you. He opened another folder and slid it toward them. Inside were photos, grainy night vision shots of humanoid figures standing perfectly still at the edge of a ruined forest. Too still. Eyes reflecting the camera light. One photo showed a variant crouched over a soldier's body, its head tilted, studying the rifle. They're watching us now, Hart said. Learning our patterns, our weapons. It's not evolution. It's imitation. Like they remember what it was to be human. Eli swallowed hard. What do you want from us? Hart didn't hesitate. We're preparing to retake Fort Mason. But before we move, we need someone to breach the outskirts. Confirm if the survivors inside are alive, or if they've become something else. Callie raised an eyebrow. You're asking us to go on a suicide mission. Hart smiled faintly. I'm giving you a chance to change the course of this war. Hours later, under a blood-red dawn, Eli and Callie stood in an armored truck, bouncing along a cracked highway toward the ruins of Fort Mason. The checkpoint team had given them supplies, upgraded weapons, and a map with marked safe paths. But nothing could prepare them for what they saw as they neared the facility. It was silent. No alarms. No gunfire. Just the hiss of wind through broken fences and empty towers. The truck came to a stop half a mile from the gate. Trees had grown wild, splitting asphalt, covering watchtowers and vines. A burned-out tank sat on its side, still smoking faintly. Eli raised his binoculars. No movement. No bodies, either. That's worse, Callie said quietly. They stepped out, weapons ready, and made their way down the slope toward the gate. The electronic lock had been melted, from the inside. Callie inspected it, frowning. Someone disabled the gate manually. Then sealed it with resin. Inside the compound, things got stranger. Cots were still made. Meals half-eaten. Doors wide open. It was as if everyone had just vanished. In the control tower, they found a working terminal. Eli booted it up while Callie watched the windows. A security feed flickered to life. They rewound the footage to 3 nights ago. On the screen, people ran through the compound in terror. Then, one by one, they froze. Some fell to their knees. Others tilted their heads, like they were hearing something. Then, they turned on each other. Not with panic. With purpose. One soldier calmly raised his rifle and gunned down his own squad. A nurse injected herself with something and smiled as her veins turned black. And standing in the center of it all, was a variant. Taller than the others. No visible wounds. Dressed in clean clothing. It didn't lunge. It didn't scream. It simply raised one hand, and everyone obeyed. Eli paused the footage. That's not an infected. That's a leader. Callie stepped back from the monitor. It's controlling them. Just then, the monitor blinked and a new image appeared. A live feed. Of the hallway they were standing in. Eli and Callie stared at each other. It knows we're here, Callie whispered. Then the lights went out. The power cut wasn't an accident. Eli's heart pounded as darkness swallowed the control tower. The monitor screen blinked twice, then died completely, leaving behind the echo of a low, humming silence. Somewhere in the compound, metal clanged faintly, like something massive brushing against a loose fence. "Move," Callie whispered. Without wasting a second, they activated their flashlights. The narrow beams cut through the darkness, revealing the room in quick, shaking swipes. The doorway was still clear. For now. Eli grabbed the hard drive from the security terminal and stuffed it into his pack. "We have proof. Now we get out." But the moment they stepped into the hallway, something changed. The air felt thick. Warmer. Like it was being exhaled. Callie halted. "Do you hear that?" Eli strained his ears. A faint clicking, not mechanical, but biological. Like claws on tile. And under that, the slow drag of something heavy. They backed down the corridor, stepping as quietly as possible. Lights on, but lowered. Every few steps, Eli checked over his shoulder. Every time, the hallway remained clear. But the feeling of being watched never left. The elevator at the end of the hall had stopped working, so they headed for the stairwell. As Callie pushed the door open, a sudden voice echoed through the floor's loudspeakers. "You shouldn't have come." The voice wasn't electronic. It was human. Calm. Controlled. Male. And familiar. "That voice," Callie whispered. It was the man in the footage. The variant. "But how is it speaking?" Eli hissed. No time to answer. Behind them, rapid footsteps erupted, not from one creature, but dozens. The stairwell became their only escape. They bolted down 3 levels, the concrete echoing with the terrifying rhythm of something chasing them. The infected weren't screaming. They weren't mindless. They were coordinated. And silent. As Eli kicked open the emergency exit, a figure leapt from the shadows. Callie swung her rifle like a bat and caught it across the jaw. The infected stumbled back, not snarling, but watching. Its eyes weren't vacant. They were aware. Eli raised his pistol. "Don't hesitate." He fired once, a clean shot through the eye. The variant dropped, twitching slightly before going still. Outside, the sun had dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the ruined base. Smoke curled from broken vehicles. They headed for the north fence where their escape route was marked. Then Eli saw them. Figures in the distance, not shambling like the undead, but walking. Their heads turned toward him in perfect sync. Their eyes glowing faintly under the darkening sky. Dozens of them. All converging. "Back to the truck," Eli shouted. Callie pulled out a flare and lit it, tossing it to the ground. The sudden burst of red smoke distracted a few of the approaching infected, but not all. They were too smart. Too focused. Eli and Callie sprinted to the field where the armored truck was hidden beneath camouflage netting. As they approached, Callie shouted, "Cover me." Eli spun and fired at the advancing infected. Some dropped. Others dodged. Dodged. "These things are adapting too fast," he muttered. "It's like they've been trained." Callie started the truck and floored the accelerator just as Eli jumped inside. The infected chased them down the road, some running with unnatural speed, others flanking from the sides. Eli manned the side turret, firing short bursts to clear their path. "We're not gonna make it unless..." A variant jumped onto the hood of the truck, its mouth open in a silent scream, its claws digging into the armor. Callie swerved hard, smashing it against a tree. Another one leapt from the woods and clung to the side door. It locked eyes with Eli, eyes full of intelligence. "You don't belong here," it hissed. Eli shot it point blank. The creature tumbled off. After miles of chaos, the road finally opened toward a hidden checkpoint where Colonel Hart's scout team waited. As they burst through the gate, the infected finally gave up the chase. The soldiers ran to the truck, weapons raised. "Get them inside," one barked. "Medical, now!" Inside the safe perimeter, Eli collapsed onto the ground, his chest heaving. Callie leaned against the truck, staring into space. Hart appeared moments later. What happened? Eli looked up, haunted. They're not just infected. They're being led. He handed over the hard drive. This is footage of the one in charge. Hart accepted it grimly. Then we're no longer fighting a virus. Callie nodded. We're fighting a mind. The weight of those words settled heavily in the air. The war room inside the bunker was dimly lit and suffocatingly silent. Maps stretched across the table, satellite images pinned beside red dots and hand-scribbled warnings. Colonel Hart stood with arms crossed, staring at the flickering footage recovered from the hard drive. On screen, the variant walked through the underground facility with purpose. Not like prey. Like a general. Behind him trailed others, undead, yes, but different. Alert. Disciplined. Eli sat across the room, bruised and exhausted, with Callie nearby wrapping her hand in gauze. She hadn't spoken much since the chase. Neither had he. Finally, Hart spoke. This isn't an outbreak anymore. It's a war. The room of senior officers exchanged glances. Only Eli responded. They're organized. They waited until we were deep inside before cutting power. Then they sent in their variants. That wasn't random. That was a trap. Callie leaned forward, voice dry but clear. One of them spoke to us. Looked us in the eye. It knew what it was doing. Hart nodded slowly. The footage confirms your story. And the voice in the control tower? We matched it with pre-outbreak biometric logs. His name was Dr. Vance Keller. Eli frowned. Who was he? A geneticist. Specialized in neurobiology. Disappeared from the CDC 6 months before the first outbreak. They claimed he went rogue. Looks like they were right. Callie stood, wincing slightly. He's not just leading them. He's evolving them. That hive behavior, it wasn't there before. They're communicating, coordinating. Hart tapped the table. Then the mission changes. We don't just hold territory. We go after Keller. The room fell into tense silence. Eli looked around. And if we don't? Hart didn't hesitate. Then we lose everything. The next morning brought the first clear skies in days. Hart had summoned his most trusted scouts, engineers, and sharpshooters. The operation would be swift and surgical. A small team would infiltrate the heart of the variant hive, an abandoned hydroelectric dam 2 valleys over, where drone surveillance had detected unusual heat signatures and movement patterns. This is likely where Keller's based, Hart briefed. They've been clearing trees, reinforcing structures, diverting water flow. They're building something. Eli was already strapping on gear. We'll need heavy ordnance. You'll get it, Hart said. And Callie, you're leading this one. Callie blinked. Me? You've seen them up close. You survived. That insight is more valuable than rank. She nodded slowly. Then we move tonight. No delays. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the team rolled out in blacked-out trucks. Eli sat in the back, staring out the small slit window at the twisted forest. He could feel it, the tension in the air, the eerie absence of birds, the sense that something was watching. Beside him, Callie went over the infiltration route again. We hit from the western side, that'll have the fewest patrols. The scouts say the variants only guard during dusk and dawn shifts. Night is our chance. They reached the edge of a cliff overlooking the dam. It rose like a black monolith, lit by strange blue lights embedded in its core. And there, on one of the highest walkways, stood a figure. Callie used her scope. It's him. Eli squinted through the lens. Keller. He was taller now, his frame warped by whatever virus he had embraced. His face still retained a sliver of humanity, but the way he moved, the stillness in his stance, it was alien. Suddenly, as if sensing them, Keller looked directly at their position. "Get down," Callie whispered. But it was too late. The lights along the dam brightened. An alarm didn't sound. Instead, drums began echoing through the canyon. Low. Rhythmic. Like a pulse. Out of the woods came dozens of variants, moving as one. "They knew," Eli said, stunned. "They knew we'd come." Callie's eyes narrowed. "Then we fight anyway." The team split, some laying traps in the underbrush, others setting charges beneath the dam's support beams. Eli and Callie moved into the heart of the structure, staying low, switching to night vision goggles. Inside the dam, things were worse than they imagined. Rows of cages lined the main chamber. Inside were humans, sedated, monitored, studied. Some were infected halfway, restrained by machinery keeping them alive just long enough to observe the process. Keller's voice came through the loudspeakers. "Curiosity. That's what separates us from them. But in the end, evolution decides who survives." Callie growled, "No. We decide." Eli pointed. "There, the core. A central server, surrounded by glowing tubes and humming machines. Whatever network Keller used to control his hive, it was here." Callie planted explosives. Eli covered her, shooting at crawling infected that dropped from the ceiling like spiders. They set the final charge and ran. As they dove from a lower walkway, the explosion tore through the base, collapsing part of the dam wall. Water surged through, drowning the laboratories and machines. Eli surfaced downstream, coughing and gasping. Callie reached for him, pulling him to the riverbank. Above them, the dam smoldered. But in the smoke, a shadow emerged. Keller. Still standing. Still alive. And smiling. Ready for Part 8, the final chapter. The river carried Eli and Callie farther downstream, away from the dam's wreckage. Smoke curled into the night sky behind them, a dark column marking the battle that had just taken place. The water was freezing, their bodies battered, but neither of them stopped swimming until they reached the shallows. Coughing and soaked, Eli collapsed on the muddy riverbank. Callie crawled beside him, her face pale and cut, but her eyes burned with determination. "He's still alive," she rasped. Eli nodded. "I saw him too. That blast, it didn't even slow him down." Lightning flickered in the distance. Thunder rolled over the hills. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally breaking. From behind them, faint voices echoed, their team. Survivors who'd made it out during the chaos. But no one was celebrating. No one believed it was over. Back at the bunker, Colonel Hart's face was grim when he heard the report. "He walked out of a flood and an explosion without a scratch?" he asked. Callie replied, "He's not just leading them, he's becoming something else. And now that we hit the dam, he'll strike back harder. He knows where we are." Hart didn't flinch. "Then we hold the line." Eli shook his head. "No. He'll send everything he has. He doesn't want territory. He wants extinction." There was a pause. "We have one shot," Callie said quietly. "Take him out directly. Just him. Cut the head off the hive." Within hours, they had a plan. Keller had relocated to an old airstrip 2 miles from the dam. Drone scans revealed minimal infected presence around the perimeter, almost like he was inviting them. But inside the hangar, thermal readings were off the charts. "He's waiting," Hart said. "Let him wait." Callie led the final squad. Eli volunteered to go with her, not for orders, not for glory. He had seen what Keller was doing to humanity. And he wasn't going to let it continue. The team moved fast through the brush, rain falling in heavy sheets. Lightning split the sky as they reached the cracked tarmac of the airstrip. The hangar loomed ahead like a steel beast in the dark. Inside, all was still. Callie pushed open the doors. What they saw inside stopped them cold. A massive organic structure had grown across the walls and ceiling, a hive, pulsing and twitching like it was alive. Suspended in the center was Keller. Or what remained of him. His body had fused with the hive. Cables and tendrils snaked into his arms and spine. His face still looked human, barely, but his eyes glowed with unnatural awareness. "Welcome," he said, voice echoing without speakers. "You've come to witness the future." Eli raised his rifle. "You're not the future. You're a mistake." Keller didn't flinch. "You still think this is about survival?" "No. This is correction. Humanity's had its time. I'm only accelerating what nature already began." Callie stepped forward, tossing aside her raincoat. "You kidnapped people. You turned them into monsters. They were reborn. Free of weakness. Free of doubt. But you," he sneered, "you cling to decay." Eli gave a silent signal. All around the hangar, the team planted charges. Enough to bring the entire structure down. Keller tilted his head. "You think fire can stop evolution?" Callie fired first. The shot slammed into Keller's chest. He roared, not in pain, but fury. The hive reacted instantly, tendrils thrashing, walls tearing open to release twisted infected who burst into the hangar, eyes wild. Gunfire erupted. Eli and Callie fought side by side, back to back, cutting down infected as they swarmed. The charges were set. Now they just had to reach the core, Keller. Callie hurled a grenade into the cluster of tendrils surrounding him. The blast tore half the cables away. Keller screamed, and for a second, his body sagged from the hive. Eli rushed forward, emptying his last clip into Keller's chest. Then, silence. Keller's eyes dimmed. The hive stopped moving. Callie ran to the detonator and shouted, "Fall back." The team bolted out of the hangar. Behind them, the airstrip exploded in a fireball that lit up the storm-filled sky. The hive collapsed, the last scream of the infected echoing into the night. Hours later, at dawn, the survivors stood on a ridge overlooking the smoldering ruins. No movement. No drums. No eyes in the trees. Callie whispered, "Do you think it's really over?" Eli stared at the ruins. "I don't know. But we stopped him." Hart stepped up beside them. "We'll rebuild. We'll reclaim. One town at a time." Callie nodded. "And if there's another Keller out there?" Eli loaded a fresh magazine into his rifle. "Then we'll be ready." The sun finally broke through the clouds. And for the first time in a long while. It didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning. The end. Let me know if you'd like a version for narration, thumbnails, titles, or a fresh new zombie story.